And then after that, my parents thought it was something that would pass, go away. But if something's of God, it doesn't go away. It keeps bothering you no matter what. So even though I eventually want to do other things at times, including getting married, of course, which is a natural thing, it just kept coming back over and over again. And I remember especially there was a point when I was around, I think, 12 years old, and I kept hearing this voice in my head say, my will or your will, my will or your will. And I thought maybe I'm going crazy because I'd never had this happen, this insistent voice constantly coming. And finally I began to figure out this is probably God. And I was like, well, who knows better what's going to make me happy than God? So I just finally said, okay, God, your will. I'll do your will, whatever it is. At that moment, because at that time I'd been turning away from really practicing as much as I had before, my just living and trying to live a good Christian life. And I remember just receiving this immense amount of peace in my soul. The moment I fully embraced His will, even though I didn't fully know what it was, but I kind of knew what it was. And I didn't want it, but I knew it was what it was going to be good for me. So I felt this peace. And then I went on from there, went to a Catholic high school. And my parents had not let me yet look into really becoming Catholic because they thought, again, this is something that's going to pass. My parents weren't the most religious of people. We weren't really going to church at that time. My grandmothers were the faithful ones. My Baptist grandmother would take me to her church. My Episcopalian grandmother would take me to her church. But it wasn't that my parents were practicing. I mean, the most they did is they taught me night prayers, and that's all I knew. Now lay me down to sleep. I prayed the Lord myself to keep. This wasn't, but God uses what's there. And they read me Bible stories at nighttime. Thank goodness, because that's how I knew the Bible so well. But that's all I had. And then when I started doing, I found at this Catholic high school I went to, they actually had daily mass early in the morning, which meant like no students ever went to this daily mass. It was a few teachers, two of whom were like the nun and the priest, and that was it. And I was like, well, if I feel like I'm supposed to be a Catholic priest, I should at least go to daily mass. So my parents were shocked when I would wake up early in the morning and go to mass and catch the bus, because I lived in D.C. So I'd catch the bus, get to school, and go to mass, and then go through the day. And I was like the worst kid possible to wake up in the morning. I was that kid that my mom would use Chinese water torture. She'd have a drips of water pouncing down my head, and then if I really would still not get up, she would rip off the cart, the sheets and everything. And then if it was really, really bad, then she would finally take a bucket of water and just pour it on my head. And that was the way to get me up in the morning. That's how bad I was at getting up in the morning. But suddenly, I was getting up before she was getting up, and I was going to daily mass. And my best friend Hugo, we were both playing soccer. We were like opposites. He was super athletic. I wasn't. He was really good at sports and everything. I wasn't. But we were best friends. And he started coming to daily mass with me, even though he didn't feel called to the priesthood. He just really loved God and really wanted to go. So him and his girlfriend and myself would all go to mass daily. So my parents finally let me become Catholic, and then through all sorts of different things. 3 years later, I entered the seminary, studied for 8 years at St. Pius X in Scranton, University of Scranton, because you have to get a college degree. And then I went to graduate school, a major seminary at Mount St. Mary's in Emmitsburg, and then it's now been 16 years later, and I'm here with you. So, and now I do various, 2 parishes, a college, St. Mary's Riken High School, and a few other jobs that I can't remember right off. Just tells you how well I'm doing at them. Anyway, that's kind of my story of how I really came to encounter Christ through those years. Of course, a lot in between. But I got here this morning. My thought was to do spiritual direction, since I have a lot of spiritual directees here. And Rich said, hey, you can do this theology thing. And I was like, hey, I have nothing planned. So I thought, rather than bore you by trying to piece together something that might not be, that it would be mediocre, I'll try to plan better when I know earlier. I thought I would just do an Ask Father. So if there are any questions you want to ask, and I'll do my best to answer them. I'll be truthful and let you know if I need to look and do more research. But are there any questions you want to ask me? So this might be a little more interesting than...
How exactly do you get into the seminary?
Okay, so if a guy feels that he might be called, and remember, the seminary is not the place you go when you're 100%. It's where you go where you're like maybe 55, 60%, I might be called. You're feeling that call. You talk to a priest, your parish priest or another priest like me. If he too is feeling that you might be, then you talk to what's called a priest called the vocation director. And his job is to work with guys who are discerning. If he feels too you might be called, then there's an application. You have an interview with him. And then after, if that interview goes well, then he gives you, or not goes well, but he thinks you're ready, he gives you an application. It's a big application to fill out for the seminary. And then if you get through the application process, you also get a physical, psychological review. All that stuff goes to a board that then looks at everything to see, do we think this guy is in the right place right now to enter seminary? Sometimes they say, we think you need a year or two in a regular college. But if they think you're in the right place, then that gets sent on to the cardinal with a recommendation. The cardinal himself, Cardinal World, looks through everything, and then he gives the final decision, yes or no. And then that's how that gets in. So it takes some months. It takes months of back and forth. Yes?
Is it directly Cardinal World or like a secretary or something?
The cardinal himself likes to review them himself. So even though he has two lay secretaries, or 2 or 3 lay secretaries, and a priest secretary, he likes to do the main reviewing himself of that. Because it's a big investment for the archdiocese. The seminary we send to, because you go to Catholic University, it's $50,000 a year. So that's a big investment. Yes?
What's your favorite thing to do as a priest?
I'll definitely celebrate Mass. I absolutely, like for me, I used to worry that I'd get bored. But the more you give yourself to Christ, the more the Mass, like every single Mass it's like the first time is the only way I can put it. Like for me at least, I can't say for every priest, but for me, I spend an hour in preparation for Mass. Like I spend a solid hour before the Eucharist, just preparing myself to enter the Mass so I can give my full focus. And then I find what the Lord does is he speaks, and he wants to do this with all of us, really, but he speaks through the readings and everything to draw me more deeply in. So by the time I'm at the time of the consecration, I am like full lock and loaded, engaged. And the Lord is just giving abundance of graces. And if anything for me, I find it's like I have to make sure I don't meditate too deeply, otherwise I'd be just there forever. But but it's definitely the Mass, and after the Mass would be hearing confessions, and after the sacraments would be doing spirit direction. I feel like that's what I was made for. Even though it's funny because the 2 things that scared me most about the priesthood were hearing confessions and spirit direction. Those were the 2 I was determined to do as little of as possible, because I was afraid, and I was afraid because I kept looking at how little I know. Like I was like I might mess people up by giving them bad advice or something, so I didn't want to do that. And God was like, oh, that's where you're most weak. Great, that's where I will be the most strong. So that's what you're going to do the most of every single day of your life. And now I love it because it's him and not me. So, yes?
What was the most memorable part of your ordination?
The most memorable part, I think, of my ordination, when you ordained a priest, I did something that might sound a little kooky, but I thought it was cool. I have relics of different saints, which is literally sometimes things saints wore, or even a piece of the body of that saint, like whether a piece of their hair or a piece of the bones. It's a Catholic tradition that sounds really, really weird. But the more you understand how God uses even the things that holy people touch and to give grace is amazing. So I had the relics of like all these major saints, and I pinned them all under my cassock inside on my shirt. So like Saint Therese of Lisieux, Saint Faustina, Saint John Vianney, like all these major saints, I had them all like on me. So as I'm laying on the floor, because you lay on the floor for the litany of the saints, as they're saying, Saint so and so, pray for us. As they're singing that, I'm like thinking, hey, that saint's right here with me, right here, literally, and I could almost like see them. I mean, I couldn't see with these eyes, but in my mind's eye, see that saint like interceding with God for me, and that was like amazing. And then of course the most amazing is when the cardinal is laying his hands on your head, and you know at that moment God is placing an indelible mark on your soul, giving you this extraordinary grace to be one of his priests. That was like, I was like just trying not to cry like a baby. The scariest moment was the National Shrine. You know, all those steps leading up to the sanctuary. That was the scariest moment, because in my mind I kept thinking I'm going to trip. Because it's all white marble, it all kind of fades together. It's really hard to. It's like I kept thinking I'm going to trip, and like everyone's going to laugh at me. So that was the scariest moment, biggest distraction. Any other questions? Yes.
Do you have a favorite saint or saint that's closest to you?
Yes. Well, there's just a number. There's a whole lot, but I think God at different points in your life, if you're attentive, different saints push themselves forward in your life because you need that intercession, and the example of that saint is what I'm convinced of. So at certain points in my life, there have been different saints that have like kind of been like, hey, I'm here, ask me for help. And I'm gonna and look at my life, because my life is gonna be an example to you. Right now, I have to say it's this this priest, Padre. Unfortunately, I'm reading his last name. I see his picture, but I can't. But it's this. I keep his holy card in my room. He's up for sainthood, and he was a really, really holy priest in Rome, who was probably known as like the top exorcist in the world. And what I think the reason God's put him right now is just a reminder of God's power over evil. So that guy whose name I can't remember is like the top one. But if you're attentive, God puts different saints in your life in amazing ways. Like for me, I didn't really have one for the longest time. And then I started reading the biography of Saint Therese of Lisieux, if any of you have heard of her, Little Child Jesus. And then the other one was I was sent to St. Pius X Seminary. And like a year before all of that, someone had given me this amazing rosary, like made of like hand-carved rocks or marble. And one day I'm praying, and these two saints come into my mind, thinking like, praying it's the 10th and Saint Therese of Lisieux. And for the first time ever, I don't know why even before, it's divine providence, I looked down at the metal of my rosary, and on one side is Saint Therese of Lisieux. And I turn it over, and the other side, Saint Pius X. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
Where did you say your first mass, and what was your first parish assignment?
First mass was at my home parish, St. Gabriel's, which is this, if you ever go to DC, it's this massive, hulking church that was built by a bishop. It looks like the size of a cathedral, walls of stained glass from Germany. Everything in the church was designed for that church. Gold leaf stars on the ceiling. This church is the bomb. Anyway, old term. But anyway, it's an awesome church, and that was where my first mass. I had served at that church. That's where I became Catholic. That's where I used to like be the sacristan, the head altar boy. So I had all the altar servers come in. It was awesome. It was an awesome first mass. I was just scared to death getting through it, but it was awesome. And then my first assignment was St. John Neumann in Gaithersburg. That was my first assignment, which is the ugliest church you've ever seen in your life. Yeah, someone needs to do something. But anyway, but the people were awesome. It was an amazing parish. It was a parish like this that's just bursting with life and young people and stuff like that.
So, when you become an ordained priest, does the like seminary, I don't know who does this, but do they like assign you to a parish or a church?
Exactly. So you make a vow of obedience at the point when you're ordained. Christian here, imagine he's the bishop. What you do is you kneel down, and the bishop puts his hands like this over your hands, and you make a vow of obedience to him and to his successors. And that way you go where you have to trust that God's going to use him to send you where you're most needed. So you don't choose where you go. The cardinal says, I want you, so and so. So a number of you have heard before that like the last place I ever wanted to go. In fact, I told God the first time I visited St. Mary's County, I was down St. Peter Clavers, down the end of the universe as I saw it, and this little hick parish. And I remember visiting and hearing what the priest did there and seeing like all this land, because they have 264 acres of land surrounding the church that belongs to the church. And I just remember saying to God, I never, ever want to come to St. Mary's County. Ever. Please. And they say you tell God something and he laughs. You tell him your plans and he laughed that day, because then I found out I was assigned, my last time I was moved was the same down here, and it's been the best 10 years of my life. So if you go where God tells you, even if you don't think you want to go there, like maybe some of you even didn't want to even come to this camp, you'll find it's the best place if you give yourself to it. It will become the best place of your life. It'll change your life. It has been.
What happens if you break that vow?
It's a serious sin. It's a mortal sin. It depends on how you broke it. So it, in certain ways, you can certainly be forgiven in confession, but there can be consequences to that depending on how it's broken. Like the church has what's called the Code of Canon Law, and it's the laws that govern the church. And there can be certain repercussions for disobedience, such as having your ability to celebrate the sacrament suspended, or even being put on permanent leave of absence. Right? So it depends on how bad it is. It can be repaired.
Following on that kind of like, what are the main ways that you can be, I don't want to say fired, but like,
But certainly getting excommunicated would be which is the highest penalty of them all. So if I go around and tell you, she went to confession to me, and then I tell you what she said so that you know who she is. It wouldn't be just saying that someone once said to me, and you don't have any idea who that is. But if I said it in any sort of way where you know that she said in confession, anything she said in confession, even like some story that had nothing to do with her sins, but she said it in confession, and you can know that she said it in confession. That's what's called lete sententia excommunication. That means immediately the priest is excommunicated, thrown out. In other words, he loses all of his faculties to say mass, hear confessions, and the only one who can forgive the priest for that sin is the Pope himself. You have to write to Rome, to the major penitentia, which is a cardinal who's in charge of sins reserved to the Pope himself. It's the only office when the Pope dies that the cardinal stays in office, because God's mercy shouldn't be held off because of the lack of a Pope. But that's the only one who can forgive you for that sin. Other would be desecration of the Eucharist, reserved to the Pope. Another thing would be, and there are a number of lists of those things, but those things would be like so bad that like you would have to be, or a disobedience, like where the bishop's like, you're to move here, and you're like, no, I'm not. Well, the bishop can say, well, then you're suspended.
What's the weirdest thing that's happened to you?
As a priest? Oh my goodness. One of the weird things that happened to me that I can say. Okay. Again, I please excuse the ones who have heard this before, but I think there are enough of you who haven't that maybe you'll enjoy this. So my first parish, we had a huge youth group of like 100 kids, and we went on a trip to visit the Swallow Falls up in Western Maryland, or maybe it's West Virginia, but we went up there and we took our youth group, and we're supposed to be going to this place where you can climb like rocks and stones and everything, and they have an 80-foot waterfall that comes down. And first coming over to the waterfall, I thought you approached the waterfall from here and look up, but actually you approach it from up and it goes down. And the first thing I see, because our kids went ahead of us, is there's a little outcropping. You see this water like raging down. There's like no gate or anything. You can walk right up to it. And there's this little stone, like maybe this long, that comes out from the rock. And there's this waterfall. And one of our kids is sitting on that stone, hovering 80 feet above rocks, with this raging water coming down, because they had been there before, but it had not been that much water because it had been a drought. But the winter I got ordained, that next winter, it was like major snowstorm. So then I see the kids are like, hey, we're going to go down and we're going to climb these stones. And the water meets up with this other waterfall thing of water, and then goes into a 40-foot waterfall. So we're going to go and see that. And I look at my youth minister, who was a guy who never believed in taking off his sweater, no matter how hot it was. So he wasn't going to go. He was like, Father, you need to go with them, because you're younger than me. At the time, I was only 27. So I was like, okay, I'll go. But I'm falling behind, because they're all like, our youth group was all athletes. And so I'm falling behind the younger kids. And by the time I get up to where they're at, there's this raging water coming down where this meets. I'm like, oh my goodness. But it gets worse, because in the middle of this raging water is this massive stone. And on that stone is a bunch of my kids. And I'm like, how in the world did they get out there? And the moment I think that, some kid further up throws himself into the water. And he's now being pushed by this raging water. This is a 40-foot waterfall a ways down there. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And then just in time, someone reaches out and grabs this kid onto the rock. And I see these little kids kind of going, like, how am I going to do that? I'm like, oh no, buddy, you're not going to do that. Neither am I. I'm like, you guys, get back here. The rest of you move forward, because I was afraid others would attempt to do it. So we started moving forward, and finally someone says to me, I wonder what happened to Johnny. What do you mean, what happened to Johnny? Is he with us or them? He didn't make it. What? He didn't make it. They reached out for him. He's not the best of shape, and he just couldn't do it. He just got swept down. It's like, then why were you not going to get help? Well, we thought we'd get everyone over, and then we'd find help. Johnny could be dead! And he was not the best of kids, but I don't want him dead. So, he's a troublemaker. But, so we're heading back. So we're heading back. And then I see the steam of the stuff rising from the 40-foot waterfall. We're now moving upwards. So we're way above the water. And this much smaller stone than the other kids have been on, but it's not too far from the waterfall. I see there Johnny. And apparently he was swept down. He's blessed by God. He didn't hit his head on a stone and sink and then get swept over the waterfall and die. Or just drown. He was somehow got his legs all messed up because the current had pushed him and he was knocking against all these stones, but he couldn't catch hold of them. He saw our summer seminarians. Never trust a summer seminarian who was fishing. And he said that later on he tells me, I called out for the summer seminarian and he just waved at me. So tell the story. If you ever go to the University of Maryland, the chaplain there, Father Walsh, that was the summer seminarian that time. Father Walsh was the and so I had to then I'm like, oh my goodness, how are we going to get to this kid? Because there's no land nearby. There's a land nearby, but there's no path over there. You have to cross near the waterfall and climb a cliff to get over to this kid. So I see these two muscular guys, they look like the type of guys that would climb cliffs. So I go to them, and and I'm talking to them, and look, there's this kid over here, he's hurt and everything, and they're like, yeah. Can you go and get him? Yeah, we can get him. Oh, great, go for it. How much are you gonna pay us? And my youth minister says, how much do you want? They're like, $100 each. My youth minister was cheap. He said, no way. Father, you get him. So here I am leading this kid. And again, I was in much better shape then, but I'm leading these kids up a cliff now for a ways, hoping none of us falls into the water and get swept down ourselves. Then we had to go around this cliff, then climb down another cliff, and then we formed a human chain, and we were able to get this kid and pull him over and save him. And then once we got back up, we noticed where we were standing was all snake holes and everything. And that was a whole other adventure. But that was probably the most adventurous thing I've ever experienced.
Fire.
In Europe, hardest criteria to enter the summit?
Wow. Probably the hardest thing is just, I think the first level is just getting to the interview itself. Just getting through that initial interview. Because in the initial interview, he asked the most personal questions ever to get an idea of where you are in terms of living and trying to live a life according. And you could have lived a really bad life. It's just but are you on the road to living a better life? So it's not like you have to be perfect. Because I think sometimes guys think, and girls think, well, to be a priest or a nun, if I'm called, I had to have lived a perfect life or never have had any problem. And that's just not, no one's like that. Except Mary. With no human being except Jesus and Mary lived a perfect life. So sometimes people even live pretty wild lives and then had a conversion and then God called them. And sometimes people think, well, because I lived a bad life at one point, there's no way I can be called to be a priest or not. Nope. Actually, God often takes the most unlikely people, and that's where he makes them, but does the most extraordinary work. Yes.
How do they know in the interview that you're not lying to make them look better?
It's true. They try to really pay attention, but I really believe God gives the gift of discernment of spirits to the priest who does the interview, because he can often tell. One time I sent one guy, I thought this guy was the perfect candidate to go in the seminary, and then he didn't get accepted. And I was like, what in the world? So I talked to this priest, and he said, I think he's a narcissist. He has this problem, this problem, this problem. And I was like, and as I started digging through, it was like, oh my goodness, everything this guy saw was true. And I hadn't even seen it. I had been a spiritual director. He'd been hiding things or putting it in language that he could hide it. But God gave this priest the ability to see what I couldn't see. So I think that's one way. And we make them, they have to have recommendations from other people and from their pastor. And you find out a lot of information from those also.
Okay.
Any other questions? Yes.
Best advice for for adoration,
That's a really good one. Yeah, I'm sure some of you are like, adoration, oh my goodness, what do I do? An hour in silence, oh my goodness. First of all, I think a good thing is variety of prayers, and to recognize that it's not about feelings. That's one thing that messes up a lot of people. They think it's all about feelings or consolations. That I have to. No, it's all about God really wants to spend time with you, and you're like, God, I'm going to make time to spend with you, and that God is going to work at the deepest level of your soul. So you might not feel anything. But I think variety helps when you're first starting out. So pray a rosary. Then just talk to God from your heart. Then maybe look at the scripture. Maybe do Bible roulette. Just open up the scripture. Lord, guide me. What is the Lord saying here in scripture to me? Or read through a gospel and then meditate on it. Think about it deeply. So kind of doing a variety of meditations can be something helpful. And not to feel afraid of boredom. Boredom is actually sometimes one of the best things because it begins to even clear your mind from where you want it to be to where God is going to then lead it. So, hope that helps a little.
Yeah. It should be good. Oh, we're time.
Good time? Okay.
Yeah.